I'm John Van Etten, the Managing Director of HS Office here in Germany, doing these little Wednesday calls about every other week on various topics. This week was supposed to be mainly on what we can now call progress checking. If you've been with us before or historically, we used to call these retests. We try to move away from retests because test has some negative connotations. Remeasurement is also appropriate, but we like progress checks. We actually thought about several. This is Christine's nodding her head. This was something that came up in our office of, helping clients to see the purpose of this. A retest is, well, why do we need that? We did a test, why retest? So the purpose is a progress check. It's not only sort of by the term progress, implying that something should be changing, but that we want to be able to measure not just that change, but we should be able to see improvement. So anyway, we're trying to change our internal terminology to talk about progress checks rather than remeasurements or time one, time two, like in the research department we always talk about. Okay. But as I was starting to talk about progress checks, Jakob and I were also talking about a very related topic of measuring return on investment. So, when we get to the point where we remeasure and do a progress check, how are we judging development and improvement, and really specifically what's going to get the client interested, because we get, and it might be interesting to hear from you as well, a lot of client inquiries around, return on investment. How do we know we're going to recoup the kind of cost, financial cost, time, effort, and so on that we're putting into these initiatives? So we'll talk about both. I'm actually going to try to talk about measuring return on investment and then move backwards to discuss progress checks, if that's fair. Yep. I think there are various ways of doing this. There's sort of a new way for LWS I stumbled upon. So I guess we'll jump right into it. Any questions before I? Okay. The first thing I wanted to do, first of all, is move myself out of the way, is to reintroduce Sean McCarthy's stages of organizational consciousness. If you're not familiar with this, I actually did this as one of the previous Wednesday calls. I don't know if we have it recorded, but we got a lot of good feedback on it. I don't think this content has been seen sort of on this continent very much, but it's very, very helpful. And I've had a lot of good feedback from clients, especially new clients. Very helpful for people who are in internal HR or OD roles, and they need to sort of not only understand HS, but they're trying to, and this is always a challenge, try to sell this internally. So if you're talking to the HR team, right, and they say, okay, we understand OCI, and then they have to turn around and try to sell it internally. This is actually very helpful for that. Once people can understand sort of where is our business in terms of the awareness that leaders have about whether culture exists and what it does, really affects the whole conversation. So if you're not familiar with it, I'll give you a 30-second introduction. So these are Sean McCarthy's stages of organizational consciousness. There's some dimensions to this. Yeah. So basically what we're looking at is organizations moving from sort of a lack of awareness of culture and its effects over here on the lower left, to a kind of an increasing awareness. So these are titled very nicely. Denial is one we used to run into all the time. This was basically the belief that culture doesn't exist. It's not a thing, or it's not a thing in our organization. In the last decade, we've hopefully moved up a bit of this, so I have less of those conversations. And then we get into, I'm having trouble reading my own tiny writing here. The non-responsive stage. So this is sort of the, yes, okay, we accept that culture is a thing, but we don't see it as a priority. We're focused on other stuff, and we don't actively look at or address organizational culture. At these lower stages, by the way, typically the arguments that work are financial arguments, things about profitability and sustainability. As you move up the stages of consciousness, basically organizations are understanding a little bit more about how they perform. As Sean would say, organizations, the outputs that organizations create are a result of processes that happen within the business. And a lot of that are cultural and behavioral, how people address their work. So the more organizations sort of are aware of that, the further they tend to move up here. At some point, they accept that culture is a thing and realize that it's important and they should address it and do something about it. We're getting to about here, but this is the compliance level. This is sort of like, well, we want to make sure that culture is okay so that we don't have any problems with it, and make sure that people, that the culture is not interfering with our ability to perform, basically. Once we stop seeing the culture as something that we need to control and prevent from causing trouble, then we start realizing that, wait, this is something that we could use to be more effective than we are. And then we start moving from compliance into efficiency, realizing that if we can improve the way that we work together, we could actually perform more effectively, which then leads us to start realizing that culture is a strategic aspect of our business and influences how we adapt, treat customers, how we perform, and that it's really a strategic topic. And this is where clients then stop arguing about, in my opinion, return on investment, especially financially, and are more interested in things like how we create a culture that promotes engagement and discretionary effort and those sorts of things. And then finally, we get toward the top where the organization is really putting culture sort of first. Unfortunately, this is a very rare group as well, and really seeing culture as a KPI. So rather than driving all of your employees crazy with global employee surveys and asking them how satisfied and stressed and all these things without any data to understand why that is, what to do about it, those things aren't going anywhere. So in any case, putting culture first, we actually have, I think I have 2 clients who actually do this. They're not looking at things like engagement or level of stress or collaboration. They're actually just looking at the extent to which we are working in constructive ways, with the understanding that that is going to then predict those sorts of criteria and outcomes. So this is sort of step 1, in my opinion, and it's sort of what I try to do when I talk to new clients, is figure out where are they in this distribution, because at each one, and again, I won't take any more time with it, there's a whole presentation on this, but you can get sort of what are the leaders and members of the organization aware of, what arguments are sort of going to stick in terms of, profitability, preventing mistakes from happening, and then beginning to leverage and grow and develop this. Okay. So performance appraise, performance, where do we focus? So I'm going to talk about this at the culture level, if that's all right for now. This is obviously relevant across other levels, and I do have LWS information that I'll also show, but I thought culture was a good place to start. So when we have these initial conversations with organizations around why are they doing this, that's the question I like to ask again and again, is why are we doing this? And usually, as I've talked about in other sessions, the answers are going to be in 2 categories. They're either doing this most frequently for KPI, performance and well-being type improvement. So again, engagement, satisfaction, more collaboration, better customer focus, adaptability, creativity, these sorts of things. The other reason that they may be interested in often comes up is values. Essentially, we recognize that either we're not quite living our values, or maybe we've come up with new values. We've merged with another organization, we've been bought out. We want to do a little due diligence around what are the values, are we living them, and if not, how is that? So to be honest with you, and again, this is off topic, but I try to get clients to be aware of both of those reasons. Even clients in the majority who come to us for performance improvement, I try to reiterate the point that, these tools are synergistic, because in part, not only are these constructive styles going to help address the performance that you are looking for, but those are the patterns that you're talking about in your value statement. And if you ask your people, they would prefer to utilize and work in that kind of environment. So it's a very nice, I always call it kind of a 2-pronged approach to talk about leadership development, teams, culture development, and so on. Again, trying to broaden the reasons and justifications by which we do this. I actually find the values reasoning to be pretty good, especially when we get to delivering reports. As I said before, it's one thing if the client says we're doing this for engagement. Once they start realizing it's driving most of their KPIs, that gets them interested. But it also seems to make a real difference when they can visually measure and see that what we are doing in this business is not what we say we should be doing. And even we as leaders are doing things that are very inconsistent with what we are telling people we really expect from them. And that difference in, you know, walking the talk, I think is very helpful as well to encourage clients to stay on the journey. Okay. So how do we measure this? So I was going to use the How Culture Works model and try to put in a few pieces. So I'm assuming you're familiar with this. You know that when I talk about KPIs and outcomes, we're talking about the things right up here. So this is mostly individual kind of well-being or well-being aspects, things like stress, satisfaction. Are you satisfied working in this organization, in your team, these sorts of things, as well as kind of performance criteria at individual team and organizational levels. So the first point is we include performance criteria, and again, they're great, right? We have individual criteria, we have team measures, we have organizational criteria. Of course, I very much like the organizational outcome these days around adaptability. I mean, that item's probably been in there since 1985, but boy, is that an item everybody's super interested in today. So anyway, so those are our outcomes. I put a few boxes, I think. Yeah. So we're talking about how culture obviously influences those things. Now, the How Culture Works model doesn't include everything. So for example, profitability is a performance criteria, but it's not really in this model. And there are other things that are not included in this model. And one of the things that I kind of miss is something that's included in our group styles inventory model. And that is the use of skills. So if you're not familiar with the GSI model, well, I can share it with you, describe it briefly, but basically what we're looking at is the behavior of the team. And then not only do we look at how effectively the team outcomes solve problems, how satisfied the members are being members of the team, whether they're committed to the solution, whether they use their time effectively. So the same kinds of kind of behavioral patterns and outcome relationship we always look at. But in GSI, there's an intermediate step that's measured using the observer's guide. And a lot of people overlook this. And anyway, when we talk about GSI, I'll talk about it, but it's very, very nice. And I've had conversations in the US, by the way, because I think it would be a good thing for us to include in the model somehow. The point is that the ability of people to use skills, and in GSI, we look at this in terms of rational versus interpersonal skills, but in any case, skills. So rational skills like things, breaking problems down into smaller pieces, considering alternatives, weighing strategy and goals and objectives versus interpersonal skills, things like listening to people and communicating and openly sharing and these sorts of things. It's a really nice kind of intermediate step because in GSI, you can observe this. And so you can watch people, you know, the red teams, the aggressive teams use lots of rational skills, but they tend to suffer in the terms of using effectively interpersonal skills. And therefore, while they may be somewhat effective in things like time management, they tend to suffer in most other criteria because people are not committed to the solution. They didn't enjoy working with the team. They wouldn't carry out the solution. They didn't feel like they had a chance to contribute, and so on. So anyway, the use of skills is something that's just as true in organizations, and I'm trying to bring this across to many of our clients. It definitely gets their attention when they start realizing that my argument is usually, you know, think about how much time and energy and resources and financial resources your organization puts into finding new employees, selection and placement, basically. And it's amazing. Organizations will screen hundreds of employees, looking at all of their knowledge, skills, competencies, previous experience, to find the person that fits their criteria. You know, then they bring that person into their organization, and whether those people are able to utilize the knowledge, skills, experience that they have is actually predicted by the culture. And this is why organizations will complain about things like my silly classic example is, you know, we need more creative people here, or we need a creative department. So we go out and find creative, unique, independent thinkers. We hire them into our organization, which let's assume is not quite as blue as this. And almost magically over the next 6 months, they become less creative, less innovative. And in 9 months, we have a group of non-creative people, sort of like everyone else. And then unfortunately, we start blaming people for not doing what they were hired for, using the skills that they were selected for. This is a nice way to illustrate that. It really is the culture that enables and predicts whether people are able to use the skills that they have. And I really like that line of argumentation. I wish we had more on the use of skills at the organizational level. In any case, it's something you can build into OCI projects, as far as I'm concerned, using supplemental outcome questions, as long as in HS, we have to be very, very careful how those are worded and who owns them and all of that stuff. But if you're able to do that, then I'd like adding questions about skills. Even things like, to what extent does this organization enable or encourage you to utilize the skills and knowledge that you have? Something just as simple as that definitely gets their attention. If we're talking about return on investment, that helps. I mean, if you're hiring people and not getting their full potential, that's a cost. If the organization can somehow measure that, or at least is aware of it, that's a big return on investment. And if we can show how much people say, I'm able to use my skills, and the organization is going to be aware of this, and not only track the development of the culture or the team or the leadership, but the improvement in the ability of members to contribute, I think that's a very good ROI. Okay, so that's use of skills. So if we have a constructive culture, we tend to encourage people to use both effective, rational, and interpersonal skills. If they do that, they'll tend to be satisfied that they get to use their skills and knowledge, and that is empowering and psychologically motivating to people. And if they use their skills, they'll tend to use time effectively and solve problems more effectively, and that's where we get to the performance piece. Okay, if that makes sense. Then the next sort of category of outcomes I consider are sort of the next stage in the process, which they're still KPIs, but I would sort of group them as external KPIs. These would be things, in my opinion, like customer satisfaction, brand loyalty, reputation in the marketplace. We're starting to get into CSS stuff, like customer service styles. So as the culture of the organization influences how your people do their work, that begins to extend beyond the organization, what Dr. Cook would call boundary spanning dynamics, and begin to affect members or people or individuals outside of your organization. And this is why with customer service styles, you get profiles from your customers that look shockingly like your current culture profile. So in any case, we can track this through. Now, we actually do this to some extent, meaning we do ask about, by the way, customer satisfaction in our standard OCI items. I think there's an organizational outcome item around how effectively the organization services its customers. I have, by the way, a lot of clients ask about that. How do you know? You're not asking the customers, but in any case, the way we do know is because actually of CSS. So the CSS is customer service styles, sort of an OCI type inventory designed to be given to your external customers, and they describe their experience working with your organization and then answer outcomes around how satisfied they are and so on. The reason we believe your people when we ask them how well do we serve customers is because in earlier research, when we would do this, we would also administer customer service styles and then actually compare how your people believe we're serving customers as compared to how customers actually describe their experience. What we actually find is a lot of similarity. Your people in the business are pretty accurate at being able to describe how well they serve customers. So it's appropriate to include it here, even though we could also ask them externally. In any case, these sorts of KPIs usually would require an additional survey of some form or a way to match data from surveys. So if the organization is already gathering feedback from customers around satisfaction, then we might be able to take that data and then sort of run some correlation analyses between cultural styles. We'd have to look at where it is and how it's structured and whether it makes sense. but that can be done. I like doing this for sales teams. If a client has enough sales teams where you can look at how satisfied are customers actually, if they've been gathering that by sales team, then it becomes fairly easy to match the data back to the team level, assuming we've got the demographics to find them, and then run some analyses. We've done this, by the way, for a couple of clients. I remember, I may have told this story last time. I'll go quickly. This was a consultant who went into a new client organization and they had given OCI to something like 20 different sales teams. And the organization they just got profiles basically. So this was a pilot, but anyway, we worked with about 20 teams, administered OCI, and just delivered to them the current profile for each of those teams. And basically what happened was the consultant went to meet with the leadership team in the organization, and they printed out all 20 circumplexes and laid them out on the table. And the consultant went around to try to figure out what, and they said, well, what can you tell us about these things? So the short story was the consultant went around and picked up the most blue profile and said, I'm going to guess this is your best performing team. They're creative, they're collaborative, they're focused on goals. This is and the leadership team was blown away. They're like, absolutely, yeah, that's right. They've been, their customer feedback is the best. We're not quite sure what they're doing. That's the secret to their success, but boy, they've been our best sales team for 4 years running, and they're wonderful. People love working there. They prefer to work in that group. It's a great group. Okay. So they put the profile down, then they walked around and they found the most sort of defensive red and green profile and picked it up and said, well, this team is, this is difficult. People in here are stressed, they're in conflict with one another, and they're not clear about what the goals are or how and what customers expect from them. And again, the team was, well, that's exactly right. And not only that, but that sales team has been losing money and costing this organization so much money that we actually had to close that location. So it no longer exists. That was a problem that we could not fix. And that was a really simple connection of ROIs, your customer feedback, basically matched to, we didn't even do it in data, but matched to individual teams. That really gets people's attention. Sometimes they'll have data on this. If they have, again, global employee surveys or every organization has surveys. So if they have others that you can get a hold of and they'll share that data with you, there's oftentimes a way to connect it carefully. Okay. So that's sort of the external KPIs, sort of stuff that's outside of the organization, but many times we can still ask members about. The next piece is really the outcomes of the outcomes of the outcomes. And this is where we get to things like profitability and sustainability. So first of all, I think this sort of illustrates why one of my biggest concerns if I talk to leaders is when I ask them how, things like trick questions, like, do you believe your organization is successful? If so, why? And I've actually had cases in which the answer is yes, we're successful. And the reason why is, well, we're making money, we're profitable. That's it. That's the criteria. So, they're exclusively focused here. And I like this model because it shows how dangerous that really is. Sometimes I say focusing on those distant outcomes. It's sort of like driving a car by looking in the rearview mirror. These things are very lagging indicators. They are a result of processes that happen within the organization and how the business addresses its, interacts with customers and suppliers and so on. This is not something that we can directly affect. Leadership lives over here. They need to understand what they can do here through the system to create the kind of culture that enables people to use their skills so that they do great work and thereby are loved by our customers, which will tend to lead to greater sales and sustainability over time. That's the actual cause and effect process. It's scary though when leaders are paying 90% of their attention to this and not to anything else that's going on. Anyway. Good. So, but anyway, to be honest with you, even the clients who are focused on profitability and I should stop and say we do have data on this. So the best article that I'm aware of, unless you guys know of another one, is the old soft changes to hard dollars article with the newspaper case studies, and that is what it's got in the clothing retail. And anyway, that's got about 4 or 5 little pieces of research that are very good. I think Lion Nathan is one of the cases, and it's looking at culture and these sort of distant outcomes, profitability, share price, sustainability, these sorts of things. So that's a good, article to kind of help people to make the connection. But even when I talk to clients who are focused on profitability, they still understand that there are things that will help us to get there, which is, ask anyone why they care about engagement. You know what I mean? They care about engagement because they've read and heard and all these big statistics about how much it influences profitability. What's frustrating, honestly, I mean, in HS, if you really look at it, is organizations keep going from this level to here and this level to here, and it's every few years there's a different topic, right? If you want your business to be profitable, you need engaged employees. If you want to be sustainable and profitable, you need creativity and innovation. We're still going from distant outcomes to immediate outcomes without getting behind the outcomes and looking at, well, how do we actually, what's causing us to deliver what we're delivering in the first place? And until they get, to culture, really, I don't believe there's anything they can really change. I don't think you can really change this without addressing culture. You can change some of them. You can change 1 or 2 of them, right? You can send people to retreats every month for de-stressing, and yeah, you could probably get your stress level to go down, but it's not something that's sustainable. You're treating a symptom of the system, and as soon as these people come back, then their stress levels pop right back up to where they were, and that is a waste of money. I mean, if you want to talk about wasting money and return on investment, trying to treat symptoms one at a time, when A, that doesn't work, and B, these are not the causes you need to be addressing. It's deeper than that. That's where organizations waste time, and you can talk to them about it. Ask them what their last 5 HROD training and development projects were. How successful were they? Did they reach their goals? And they'll be talking about this stuff, and well, people aren't engaged and we don't know why, and we've been spending money and developing leaders and doing everything, and the numbers just not moving. How many years have you been doing that? How much money and time have you put into that without any good structure or data to understand really whether this is going to pay off, how it all sticks together? It's blind. I hate to say it, it's a bit of blind guesswork, and that's what I think what we help with. So anyway, this is kind of how I think of it. I think this is pretty accurate. I talked to Rob last year or 2 years ago about trying to fit some skills items in, and also, anyway. But if this helps to understand and think about, where is our client? What are they interested? What are the things that are going to get them to commit to real change? Hopefully they fall into one of these buckets. I'm going to guess they will. And then the question is, how do we capture that? Skills and outcomes we can customize. Some of these external things, we may need data sets, or we may need to send, we've done this, separate surveys to customers or internal customers where they give feedback, and then we can match the data. Or can you give us profit sales numbers and that sort of thing? Honestly, I love to get this kind of data, but in our region, Europe, I have a really hard time getting clients to share this. I know in Australia, they seem to have more success in a variety of ways in terms of getting clients to share cases and data and these sorts of hard numbers. But for me, even with clients we work with for a long time, they don't want to share profitability numbers. But does this make sense in terms of the kind of types of performance that the client might be interested in, where they are, and how we might try to address them? Okay. Cool. So, I mean, the first thing is understanding what the client is interested in changing and developing. The next is to, I think, to try to demonstrate to them that culture or leadership or team dynamics are connected to that criterion, that in order to change the outcomes you care about, we need to change leadership culture, the system behind it. So we do that in a few ways. I'm going to try to show you some of these correlation analyses. I'm not sure if I can get very close. I can't really zoom in. Let me explain. So I'll actually go back a slide or two. So what we're looking at are the customized kinds of outcomes that I talked about, really in terms of skill use and these performance well-being criteria. So For clients, we can build those in as supplemental outcomes. And then the idea would be to run, what we do then is to run a simple Pearson's correlation analysis to look at the relationship between culture and their unique customized outcomes. This is, by the way, something I've been talking about for years and very, very much like doing and try to do with most of our clients. And what I mean is customizing the outcome criteria to address specifically what they're interested in. Getting back to the why are we doing this and the return on investment, one of the things I sometimes ask leaders is, do you have KPIs that you measure? Do you have in global employee surveys? Yes, of course. Great. Do you have questions or results there that you're not happy with, you've tried to change and have not been able to? What are the top 4 or 5 performance, well-being things that you really wish you could get your hands around and deal with and haven't been able to in the past? And they'll give you whatever it is, diversity and inclusion or discretionary effort or creative thinking or whatever. Then we need to start developing and really writing good outcome items to ask people these things. And then again, build them in and run correlation. So what we have on the far right are, no, it's left, are the custom items. I'll read a few of them to you. There are 2 that I've put in boxes because I think they're fun to talk about. And then we're running correlations between the outcomes and the culture style. So I've color coded them. This is a nice data set, by the way, because it's pretty large. We've got over 10,000 people in here. So you get really nice correlations. So the items, just to give you a few, are things like I enjoy coming to work. I'm confident in the future of success of this organization. I'm proud to tell others that I work for this organization. The leadership makes me proud to be an employee. The organization's culture enhances employee commitment. Okay, so the 2 that I've put in boxes here are, well, does this organization, had to anonymize here, encourage an environment where people have, where people value individual differences? I have too small a font. With respect to diversity, including gender, ethnicity, religion, nationality, so on and so forth. So this is basically a diversity and inclusion item. Does the organization sort of encourage participation regardless of kind of demographic, who you are, kind of things? The other one I very much like is this last one here. Are good ideas welcomed regardless of who suggests them or where they come from? Love it. Great creative kind of question, innovative question, right? Of organizations who are trying to adapt and change, you should be listening to everyone, and any part of the business may have great ideas. So anyway, we include the items and then we run correlations. What we have here are just 2 pieces of data. So the first is the actual correlation. I know it's a little small to see. I'm happy to share this with you, but you get, with HS tools, it's so beautifully consistent. And I've only seen positive correlations for constructive styles, meaning if the item is positively worded, like does this organization encourage participation from everyone? You want people answering those. That's a positive item, right? You want them answering with a high score. Yes, right? There are other items that are reversed, but just for the correlations to keep it clear. So you tend to get positive correlations, meaning the more constructive the culture of the organization, the more positively people respond to these items. And that's the cause and effect relationship that we really want to bring across. It's wonderfully consistent, not only within organizations, but across organizations. We've been customizing outcome items for several years now. We've probably included over 500 of them in different organizations, in different industries, all different types. And I have not found one yet that has sort of moved in an unexpected direction. Constructive patterns and styles promote performance and well-being, and defensive patterns decrease. You can see it, the positive correlations for the blue styles, it's very small, but when you get to the green and red, there's a little minus sign in front of the correlation, which is showing that that's a negative relationship. The more passive the culture of the organization or more aggressive the culture becomes, the less or the lower people respond to these items, and that's consistent across all of them. And again, a good example of why we want to get more than one performance criteria, more than one, why are you doing this? So that at the end of the day, they can see the beautiful synergy that all of us in HS understand, that, you know, you got to get the blue styles moving upward if you want your outcomes to move upward. That's where you need to focus your efforts. So once we show this relationship, and by the way, the more data you get, typically the more consistent the correlations are, because these effects are very, very strong. You can see this in the correlations. I mean, these are all, by the way, at the 0.001 confidence interval. So we're 99.99% sure that the culture is the factor that is influencing the way people respond to these outcomes. So it makes it very, very difficult for the organization to dodge culture, if you see what I'm saying, because I can continue to come back and go, well, don't you care about this? And I thought this was a priority. What about this? All of those things are promoted by culture. So really put culture first. I have another one. This is a different client, same kind of thing. I just included it because it had different items, and you can see the same damn patterns show up again. Anyway, so this is a totally different organization, different industry, but again, asking questions about communication between departments, achieving great results. There's questions in here around creative, innovative thinking, feeling safe at work. By the way, topics of psychological safety are very, very good to add as custom outcome questions, I think. So that's basically how it's done. We've tried a couple of different ways to show correlations to clients, because it's maybe not for some organizations, you know, your pharma organizations and engineering and data-driven, they'll love this. Some of the others will sort of struggle. I like to try to talk people through it, you know, put this up and as we are now, so that they clearly get the point. But there are other ways to show these things. For example, comparative profiles. So, and this is also something that we've begun doing for clients. There are some challenges around doing comparative profiles. The most common trap, I guess, for us HS people is not to use the outcome as the dependent variable. We need to use the culture as the dependent variable, and the outcome as the independent variables. If you use, and this is a classic trap, if you use the outcome as the selection variable, then you are selecting on the dependent variable and you get wrong statistics. It looks good, but it's really not. To show the real cause and effect relationship, it's not outcome and how that correlates to culture, it's how the culture drives the outcome. So what we really need to do comparative profiles accurately is to take the data sets and basically export them into Excel, rank order them in terms of, you can do it different ways, but my preference is most constructive versus least constructive. I think that's true across most offices. So, and then you're taking the top 10%, you know, most constructive, or, well, in organizations, it's sort of bizarre, but in any case, you know, individuals who have the most constructive perspective of the culture versus individuals who have the most defensive perspective of the culture. And again, we can do this with other things. It takes a little more work, but you can do this with GSI and teams. Get enough of the data, export it, cut the groups, identify the top and bottom most constructive versus defense or least constructive team profiles, and then move back and start looking at how they answered the outcome items. So this is the same, this is Australia's actually example, but it's the same thing. The profiles on either side, and then again, we're comparing this and showing the gaps between the two. This is very much how we show comparative profiles and things like why culture and leadership matter in that book. Same thing here, we're just going through, there are 3 slides because one is individual outcomes, group, and organizational level outcomes. The point is just to demonstrate to clients that the more constructive patterns you have playing out in the business, the more positive responses you get across outcomes, and the more defensive it becomes, the more negative it becomes. So again, still proving the relationship, not yet demonstrating the change and return on investment. Okay, I'm going to take a slight side step here because I want to talk about LWS. I'm guessing at least some of the HS people have seen this graphic. I forget where it came up first, but this is LWS comparative profile data, basically. So we take from LWS, and this is feedback, I believe. So this is leaders who are described as behaving most constructively versus least constructively. And then again, how they're described in terms of 9 performance criteria. And these are overall performance in their job, teamwork and ability to work effectively with people, ability to communicate clearly, listening skills, job-related technical expertise, creativity, effectiveness in solving problems, and sorry, I have to move my menus. Skill at resolving disagreements effectively, productively, and ability to lead and influence people. I first of all think these are fantastic outcome items. I mean, they really get to the heart of, I think, pretty good measures of leadership effectiveness. Again, we can show the top. I think this is 10%. We typically try to stick with 10% if we have enough data. The top 10% leaders, you can see their blue bars. The least constructive leaders have the red bars, and the gray is average. So we can show, and by the way, so we can show the constructive styles not only help, but they help your people to perform more effectively, certainly than average, and defensive behaviors have a negative effect. They're pulling your people down from the average, if that makes some sense. Okay. So the side story is I had a client who has been using LWS for several years, and recently they had a new CEO come in, and the new CEO unfortunately started, as is often the case, sort of questioning, well, really questioning constructive styles. Basically the feedback that I got is, you know, are we really sure that blue styles are the way to go? Are we sure that red isn't really what we want? The new leader is interested in some aggressive, you know, results, which are outcomes, by the way, not culture, but so they are thinking maybe we need some red styles. So I started pulling up this stuff and research in LWS to try to show the relationship, but you know, nothing gets their attention like their own data. So I was thinking about it, and I thought, I mean, I had heard years ago that LWS does include outcome questions. They're just not included in the report. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. I'd heard this, and I assumed that there were 2 or 3 questions in the LWS. And anyway, we don't include them in the report, and they're used for research purposes. That's basically what I had heard. We did some digging, or I did some digging to see, well, what are those questions? Because if we're asking them, that would be the thing to feed back to the client. Well, lo and behold, those questions are these 9 questions. They're asked in LWS feedback every time you do the tool. The data is stored, but never accessed. The reason it's actually done is to, I mean, you know, LWS, what we're really measuring, at least what you get in the report, is the self profile and the feedback profile. And then of course, text to describe that profile. And then it gives you, you know, here's some areas where you might need to improve, and here's some recommendations for that. All of that is based, as we always talk about, on the profiles. It's doing that based on what's in the profile. But the way that we, well, I think the way that we originally understood the relationship between those styles and those leadership types of outcomes were with these items. And I'm guessing that these are also items that are used with some regularity to basically recheck our data to make sure that the tools are continuing to predict things like creativity and leadership skills as much as they did 45 years ago. So anyway, it's in there for research, but nobody knows about it, or at least I didn't, and our clients certainly didn't. So that's what we did. It took some time, but we exported all of their leader LWS feedback data for the last 2 years, which was 169 leaders. And well, we did a few things. The first thing we did was create a composite profile, which was interesting. I don't like doing that with LWS and LSI, but it did show a pattern. There was the self-description profile was very much 50th percentile, which is what you should see. The feedback, the behavioral profile was very close, but shifted. The whole thing just shifted down about 7 percentile points. So a little suspicious. Anyway, then we went in and did this exact same thing. This is not the client's data. It's not anonymous, so I didn't put it up. And it came out beautifully. It came out the same. In fact, even some of the percentage gaps, I didn't even have to change. I think 3 of them I didn't change because I found exactly the same percentile gap in our client's data that we were showing in this. So that was very eye-opening for our clients. So we could show them very clearly that here are your more constructive leaders, here are your least constructive. Here's how this plays out in terms of performance. The other thing we did was a correlation analysis on overall constructive, aggressive, and passive styles, and the aggregate performance. So averaging all 9 of these scores together into one, and then looking at the 3 independent variables, constructive, passive, and aggressive, how they influence that. And you get the same correlations. I didn't put it in here, but that you saw before, very strong positive correlations with constructive styles driving these things up, and negative correlations for defensive styles, with passive styles being predictably more negative than aggressive. So it's all quite fun to see it happening in clients' data, just the way it always does. But very good for the client, definitely got their attention, was a way to prove to them that only constructive behavior within their leaders is positively contributing to their performance based on these criteria. And that seems to have answered the question. Okay. So now the first part was, what is the client trying to change? The next part of the talk was how profiles, in this case, I basically was just talking about culture and leadership in LWS, influence those kinds of outcome criteria. And by the way, I'm sort of skipping over this, but you can do this for individual level tools. You can't customize outcomes, but there are a few things you can do. Let me try to, so one thing we've done rarely in the past, but has been done, is to add questions to the, Christine might have to help me how we did this, I think to the invitation text, or to the email, one of the emails. So that basically the feedback respondents, when they were going to access the survey, were getting a couple of extra questions in an email that they could respond to, performance questions about that individual leader that they're describing. And then we can match that data back, even though we can't build that custom item into the LSI or LWS platform on IDA. We can sort of sneak it into the invitation or the emails or the communication one way or the other, and then gather that data. Create some manual work, but at least you're able to give the client data specifically on what they care about and answer their questions. There is another way to match individual data to performance data, and I have done this for 2 clients, and that is to use their own performance appraisals. This can be a little sensitive, but if they'll share, it works. And it actually was interesting. So what I mean was, in this organization, we assessed something like 100 leaders with LWS. Then the organization provided us with the performance appraisals of those 100 leaders in basic boiled down numeric scores. And then we're able to again match that data and then start looking at a few things. One, really interesting stuff. One was basically, does more constructive behavior in the leader positively affect the performance that we care about and we've been measuring? And the answer there was yes. But what was very interesting was the other question, which is much more, I really like this, which was basically, does the organization accurately recognize and reward constructive behavior? Basically, do people who behave most constructively get more positive performance appraisals, not only because they're performing more effectively, but based on how we perceive them? This is where we started to find some of the weird patterns that we have found in HS before. Another topic I really want to do a Wednesday session on is the positive outcomes that are associated with defensive styles. This is something we used to talk about a bit in the accreditations in the old days, but it's been smoothed over a little bit. But it's fascinating. So like if you look at the old LSI research, right, there's quality of interpersonal relationships has a positive correlation to passive defensive styles, as does, and the one for aggressive styles, there are 2, right? It's salary and rate of promotion is positively correlated to aggressive behavior. Now, is a cool topic, but first of all, that correlation has been changing over time, which is suspicious, and that I would suggest means it's a perception, meaning in the old days, we used to view aggressive behavior as being more appropriate and certainly being more something that we would see as a leadership characteristic. And therefore, people who behaved aggressively, they were dominant, dictatorial, took control, were seen as somehow more effective. This is right. This is our bias coming in, and therefore we're promoted and also paid more. So you do get, it's sort of fascinating to look at LSI, right? Because aggressive behavior, the only thing you kind of get out of it is you're more likely to be promoted and paid more. But literally every other measure of your performance and well-being decreases. So, the organization this is a great example of organizations kind of being tricked by aggressive behavior. It looks good. It looks like they're getting things done, and they're getting tricked into rewarding it. And that's how I think you get a lot of these aggressive cultures sort of initiated. So anyway, it was really kind of a cool thing to look at their performance appraisals and the behavior of their leaders and try to answer a couple of questions on, not only does constructive behavior promote performance, that was fairly straightforward, but how accurate are we in recognizing the constructive behaviors and rewarding that rather than the aggressive behaviors? And we did find this in their data. They did not reward passive behavior. They did reward constructive behavior, but they had a tendency to promote people who behaved aggressively a little bit more than average. So that still played out within their data set, and I think was really helpful for them, because the part of what they've done is reevaluating their leadership and feedback and performance appraisals. So anyway, this can be done at the individual level. It can also be done with teams and groups. Sometimes you could, if people sat down in the old days with paper and filled it out, you could just add another piece of paper onto the back of that paper GSI and ask them more questions, outcome questions, and then you could put it all together. So anyway, if you have questions how to do that or anything, happy to help. But the point is, what I'm describing and have described should be something that can be feasibly done at individual, group, and organizational levels. Okay, so now that we've talked about what the client wants and how much over time am I? Oh boy. What the client wants and how these things are related, then we really need to be able to show development. So this is a client of ours. I'm very happy to say this culture profile 2015, 2017, moving toward their ideal. This, by the way, is from a progress report, also known as a time 1, time 2 report. These things are great. I just took out a couple pages because we don't have time. So this is how they've moved. Then there's pages around correlations and item level and all that good stuff. But this is really what I wanted to show, and is exactly what I tell clients, and they don't believe me. But so these are standard outcomes. So these are all the standard outcomes for OCI. Here is the average score in 2015. Here's the average scoops for each one in 2017, and then the constructive benchmark. But anyway, literally, if you go through here and look at every one of them improves, and a lot of them like by more than 30%. Every one of their performance criteria, whether it's performance, whether it's well-being, whether it's at the individual level, team level, how we deal with customers, everything is trending positively. That is what I always tell clients, means that's how you know you're addressing culture. You're finally getting behind the symptoms and getting at the cause. If you actually address the cause effectively and create more constructive norms, you should see, because we got positive correlations with everything, you should see an improvement in all of your performance criteria. Like I said, very few clients, I think, believe me when I say that, but it's a really nice thing to be able to, when we remeasure, to be able to demonstrate that. So as much as I try to hold the client accountable to the change, I also kind of want the client to hold us accountable to it, because I want them to be coming to us and saying, look, we expect this change. We want to see this. That's the kind of goal orientation that we need to see this journey forward and get to the point where we can see a change, not just in the culture, but then we can see it playing out here. And now I can tell you, this client does not focus on these sorts of KPIs. They're not looking at stress. They're not looking at these things. What they're paying attention to is culture. So the time 1, time 2 report is a very, very nice way to show that change. I think I'm about out. Yeah. These are some slides from Australia around more financial improvement. So this is from clients and across clients. Various industries are included over here, and we can do this as well. We haven't yet, but we could do this sort of thing. But this is a nice slide, and it talks about things like profitability, and another one is reduction in costs. So if you want, when you think about profitability and costs, the other outcomes or KPIs that are pretty easy, that sort of, Some of these external KPIs, in my opinion, would also include things like employee turnover rates. That's one of my favorite things to ask about. How quickly are you turning over people? How much is that costing you? If we can change the culture, then we'll shift things like engagement and employee commitment. And I'm more likely to say this is a good place to work. And by the way, one of our clients just won Best Place to Work in Canada. And that was a goal of theirs in their culture. And one of their goals, I remember from 5 years ago, was we want to be the best place to work. That's an outcome. We need to address culture in order to do that, and they have. So that's so there are various ways. I hope this makes some sense to do this. Looking at reduction in cost, safety is another one. So safety is expensive, not maintaining it necessarily as much as when safety issues happen. So if you're working with raw companies that have safety challenges, I have a few clients who are in mining, and that's always a topic of safety. Manufacturing sites, when an accident happens, how frequently does that happen, and how much does that cost your business? Now let's work on the culture. In the next 12 months, we'll look at how your safety rate is improving and how much that's saving you. By the way, years ago, I'm sorry I'm going over, I'll try to wrap this up. We used to have consultants more frequently, but who would actually go to clients and guarantee a return on investment. And this is basically the way that they would do it. They would ask questions about safety issues, employee turnover, training and development, return on investments, get the measurements that they're already aware of, care about, and maybe are hopefully kind of frustrated with. And then we will demonstrate change on those criteria. This is the Yarra Valley case study from Integrate Company. So I'm guessing you guys have seen it. If not, you know where it is. But it's another good kind of KPI thing, because it's not only talking about reduction in cost and employee turnover, but growth and profitability, multiple sort of big, good reasons by which we want to do this, and we can demonstrate improvement. All right. I think that's about it. The other one I skipped completely over was the values argument, right? Not walking the talk. And actually, when we remeasure and do a progress check, that new OCI current profile is progress towards the ideal, hopefully. And so that alone, I think, is progress. How much closer are we to working the way that we all say and know we should, regardless of the next questions, which are all of our performance stuff, which again are very closely linked. And this is the synergy. One of the ways I like to talk about synergy to clients, and that really is that the things that help you, the culture that's going to help you perform is the culture that you've been talking about all along in your value statements. It's not really a question of what you want. It's a question of how do we create that. And again, we give good tools and models to help people identify where they need to put their efforts. All right, I've gone over time. Apologies for that. I'll hang out here a little bit in case there are any other questions. Hope this was helpful. Otherwise, I'll see you in 2 weeks.